Hi, I'm Jay Phelan. Let's learn some biology. We're going to talk today about digestion and absorption. We saw that all organisms that are living need raw materials so they can build and grow, and they need energy to do things that don't occur spontaneously. So what we're going to do today is talk about the 4 steps of digestion and absorption by which we get that energy, those raw materials, from the food that we eat. And it starts with ingestion. You put something into your mouth. We've got teeth. Teeth are designed to mash it, squish it, press it, rip it apart. And the purpose, the primary goal behind this and many of the first steps in ingesting food is you want to increase the surface area of the food as much as possible so that we are able to get enzymes in there to break it down so that we can absorb the component parts. So first thing that happens, your teeth tear it, grind into it, they chomp it down. At the same time, the salivary glands secrete fluid. This is mucus that's going to make it easier for the mashing, but also a little bit of something called alpha amylase. This is an enzyme that is effective at breaking down starches. So the very first step of breaking these macromolecules in your diet into something usable occurs right in the mouth. In fact, if you take a bagel that has starch in it and you put it in your mouth, you chew it up a little bit, but you don't swallow it, you just let it sit there, as the enzyme, the alpha amylase, acts on it, what it's doing is taking this starch, this polysaccharide, and it's cleaving off that glycosidic linkage so that individual monosaccharides are free. And when those are free, now that's a different molecule that can fit into the sweet taste receptors in your mouth. So all of a sudden you'll notice this thing that didn't taste sweet at first then becomes sweet as the alpha amylase has its effect. So that's an experiment you can try. Sit with a partially chewed bagel in your mouth for a few minutes, 10 minutes maybe. Let me know how it goes. Then you also have glands on your tongue, and these start to secrete lipases. So just as it sounds, lipids and anything ending in ASE, that usually indicates an enzyme, something that's going to take part in a chemical reaction, starts breaking down the lipids that you might have consumed. Here's an image of a tongue. The cross-section of a tongue reveals that about 2/3 of it is muscle. And the top part has all sorts of sensory receptors and so on. But that muscle is so that you can move it around and get it to the teeth where you can chop it down so that you can increase the surface area of it. That eventually gets it into kind of a ball-shaped form, and it goes down your esophagus. So you've got 2 tubes going down. One's going to go into your lungs, one goes to your stomach. A little flap goes over the trachea to your lungs so that the food goes down the esophagus. And then peristalsis, which are just waves of contractions of smooth muscles, kind of like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. Peristalsis is going to push it down into the stomach. And there's our first quarter of the process, ingestion. The second part of this digestion and absorption is digestion. And digestion is when you're actually taking macromolecules, polymers, and you are breaking them down into their component parts, because it's only the component parts, the smaller bits, that can be absorbed into our bloodstream, and then we can use them for our own energy and building projects. So the first thing that happens is there's a round bit of muscle around the top of the stomach, and this muscle closes so that it keeps the food that's gone into your stomach in your stomach. And that's important because as soon as there's food in there, your stomach starts to secrete all sorts of chemicals, and these include hydrochloric acid, pepsin, which is a protease to break down proteins. That acidic environment there turns out to be really crucial for breaking down protein. So the stomach also has a lot of muscle around it, so it starts churning, kind of the way your teeth were doing in your mouth. Now it's doing in your stomach to move it around so that the acids and the pepsin, the protease, get access to the food. So here's what the pits of the stomach look like prior to there being food in there. There's not much there. They only start secreting these fluids when there is some stress on the stomach, causing it to realize that there's food in the stomach. So here you see it after it starts doing that. The cells get bigger. They start to pump out the various fluids. I want to tell you a story relating to this, proteins. When I was in graduate school, as you know, I am not a cook. I'm not a good cook, but I am adventurous. So I saw a magazine article, and this should have been my first tip-off. It was a bad idea, in Esquire magazine. And some guy wrote an article about how he'd been in the Peace Corps, and he, during his time there, grew to love goat as a protein source, as a meal source. In fact, it's the most commonly eaten meat in the world. He wrote this article about it, and as I was reading it, I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting. I'm going to try and cook some goat. So I went to this store in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I lived, and it was known for having exotic meat. I went in, I asked for some goat. I got it the way the article had said that I should get it, and I talked with the guy behind the counter, told him what I was doing, that I was going to grill it and cut it into cubes and so on. He said, well, come back, let me know how it goes. So I take it, I go home, I cut it into cubes, I have my barbecue, and I have some friends over, and we put it on skewers and we barbecue it, and it looks good. It looks kind of like chicken, but it's a very lean meat. And then we start eating it. We had some potatoes with it and some other stuff. We start eating it, and I'm chewing, and I'm chewing, and I'm chewing, and I'm chewing. And it's like chewing on an old shoe, just a piece of leather. It's really hard. So I'm thinking, wow, this is not so good. And after a little bit more chewing, I realized this is not even edible. So had to figure out, we ordered pizza or something. I was very disappointed in that. But I thought, I'll go back to Savinors. I'll let them know, that my experiment failed. And while I'm waiting in line at Savinors, someone taps me who's standing in line behind me, and I turn around and I look, and it's probably the most famous shopper ever of Savinors, which is Julia Child. And that's where she would shop. She just strikes up a conversation. She said, what are you getting? And I said, I'm not getting anything. I got goat, and it didn't work out, and I'm here to tell them that. It's not their fault, it was my fault. But she said, well, how'd you prepare it? And I explained to her, and she's like, no. She said, it's very lean, a lot of protein, a lot of collagen. You got to break it down. She said, you need strong acids to break it down. She said, get a marinade, something, but marinate it not just for an hour, 2 hours or whatever. She said, you got to put it in a really acidic lime marinade or something for like 24 hours. Then you can clean it off, put some other sauce on it, whatever, and then cook it. She said what that does, it denatures the proteins. In other words, it unfolds them into their linear strands of amino acids, but that makes it easier then for your body to break them apart. Essentially what you're doing is you're pre-chewing the food for your guests. So I get to the front of the line, and instead of whining about it, I get another goat and I cook now the second one, different group of friends. I marinate it for 24 hours in this very acidic lime marinade, and this time it turned out great. There you have it. Very lean meat, lots of collagen, but that protein requires some advance working over. Here's in the concrete outside of Savinors. Julia Child even wrote Bon Appetit, and there she is with the owner. Anyway, so the take-home message of this aspect of what I'm talking about is that you need harsh conditions to help break down foods. One of these is marinating in harsh acids, like your stomach is doing. Another is by cooking food. Heat also denatures protein. So that's one of the important functions served by cooking. It helps us to be able to extract a higher percentage of the useful nutrients in our food. So cooking is an extremely important part of the process of absorption if you want to be efficient. After you get through all of this breakdown, it stops looking like food so much anymore. It's called chyme. And so you're in this very acidic 1.5 to 3.5 pH. So let's say about 2, which is really acidic. pH goes from 0 to 14. 7 is water. And as you get a lower number, it's more and more and more acidic. So you're super acidic. You have the lipids are still kind of greasy droplets. Remember, lipids are defined as things that are not soluble in water. Then you have at the bottom end of the stomach, just like at the top, you have this circular ring of muscle that's closed, and that starts to open up a little bit, and from the contractions on the stomach, it squirts the chyme into the next part of your digestive tract, the small intestine. Now, you'll hear people talk about acid reflux or heartburn or indigestion. What are these? These heartburn, it's not burning anything, and it's not actually your heart, but it happens to be in that part of your chest. What happens, remember, you've got this highly acidic fluid in your stomach. You've got the ring of muscle above it. If by chance some of the contents of your stomach come through that ring of muscle and they get to the bottom of your esophagus, the highly acidic fluid is going to burn down there. And so you feel that. So the indigestion, the heartburn, the acid reflux is from acid touching your esophagus. It's not normally supposed to be there. And if you've ever thrown up, you know this. It burns because stuff coming from your stomach is highly acidic. If you take a product to treat this, antacids, they are just a highly basic substance. So it's like bicarbonate, like baking soda. That on the pH meter is way above 7. So it mixes with your stomach acid, and essentially it brings your stomach pH up closer to 5, 6, 7, which then when the fluid touches your esophagus, it's not going to burn it. But you're essentially fighting against one of the functions, the adaptations of your stomach. So it treats the symptom, but it actually is not great for your own absorption. Oh, one other thing I want to say. Once I was going to San Francisco. I had to give a big presentation and had to prepare the presentation. So I'm at my parents' house. I stay up all night. So in the morning, I have to get ready to go, and I don't drink coffee or tea, but I thought I could use some caffeine. We're going to talk about caffeine in a few weeks. I said, "Do you have any Diet Coke?" And my mom said, "Yeah, we might, maybe in one of the cupboard way in the back." So I go in, sure enough, there's this dusty 6-pack left over. And so I take it, I open it, and I start drinking it, and it tastes horrible, really bitter. And my only thought is, well, I've been up all night, I just brushed my teeth, it's like 8 in the morning, so that's why it tastes bad. So I get in the car, I drive the 10 miles to San Francisco, and I just keep drinking it, and it's really horrible, super bitter. Anyway, I do my presentation, everything was fine. I come back, and that night I said, I gotta try another one of these sodas to see if it was just that it was morning or what it was. So I open it up and I taste it, and it's also really bitter. So I look around on the cans and I finally see there actually is a expiration date, and the expiration date had passed like 4 years earlier. So I got nervous, so I look online to see what's the issue here, and it wasn't dangerous, but what I found out was that the sweetener, NutraSweet, is made from 2 amino acids. So you have aspartic acid and phenylalanine, and they are bound together. On their own, each of them is kind of bitter. And these are the building blocks of proteins, which is kind of funny. It's a sweetener, but it's made from 2 amino acids. When they are combined, they fit into the sweet receptors in your taste buds, and they trigger your brain, the sensation that you have consumed something sweet. But the reaction by which they are bound together is reversed by heat and time. So if a lot of time goes by, or not that much time goes by, but it gets hot, that bond will break. And they're still there, the aspartic acid and the phenylalanine, but they no longer have their sweetness, and instead they are bitter. So that's what the issue is. And you can try this yourself, that normally they'll stay together for months and months. But if you keep them at 80 degrees, that months and months becomes weeks. You keep them at 90 degrees, it becomes days. A little hotter than that, and it becomes a matter of hours before they are separated. So you can try and see how it is. Unfortunately, cooling it off doesn't cause the bonds to go back. I should say, it's important to know that for a while people thought, oh, there must be something bad about these artificial sweeteners. And in fact, there is no evidence that they are harmful to you. There was initially there had been some study where they had looked, and it looked like maybe in super, super high doses, NutraSweet maybe was associated with a tiny increase in risk of some cancers. And then when they looked again, the National Cancer Institute and the FDA, they said, let's see, the results from subsequent carcinogenicity studies have not provided clear evidence of an association with cancer in humans. Similarly, studies of other FDA-approved sweeteners have not demonstrated clear evidence. Elsewhere, they've said, after reviewing the study, FDA, this initial study that caused people to think this, FDA identified many shortcomings in it and did not alter its previous conclusion that aspartame is safe. It seems that isn't supported by evidence. All right, so our first take-home message here is that harsh mechanical processes, that's the chewing, that's the churning of your stomach, and chemical processes, that's the hydrochloric acid, that's the amylase, aid in the first steps of digestion. Now the third phase, absorption. A lot of times people talk about digestion, but when they're talking about it, they've rolled into it absorption, actually getting the nutrients, but we think of them as separate phases. As the chyme gets squirted into the first part of the small intestine, now there's still a little bit of digestion going on, breaking down proteins into strings of amino acids, separating the amino acids, breaking down lipids and triglycerides into their fatty acid chains, so on. So you get a little bit of that still occurring in the small intestine. Now the small intestine is a tube. Think of it like a garden hose. It's about 20 feet long in humans. It's long because even though it's all squished in you can think of it as like a conveyor belt, that the food is going to be moving through these waves of smooth muscle contractions. Here's a little diagram where you can see it's got all these finger-like projections because you want to have many cells in contact with the fluid that's moving through so that it can be absorbed into our bloodstream. And then around that, you have a mucosa that's going to secrete enzymes and is also going to absorb the nutrients. And then you have smooth muscle in a couple of layers that can squeeze it and push it down. Here's a picture you can see. You see the little finger-like projections, but the fluid can bathe all around those, giving your body lots of contact between the fluid and the intestine. As the fluid is in the small intestine, then your pancreas has all these connections into the digestive tract. It starts secreting first bicarbonate ions, which are going to bring the pH back up towards 7, lipases, which are going to start breaking down the fats in your diet, amylases to break down the starches into monosaccharides, and trypsins, and many other enzymes as well, but that are going to work on digesting the proteins. As the fluid moves through your small intestine, lots and lots of absorption of the materials. Then your liver produces bile, which is like a detergent, like soap essentially, and it gets stored in the gallbladder, which then sends it into the digestive tract. And what this does is it breaks up the clusters of fat, which won't dissolve in the fluid, but by breaking them up into smaller little droplets, now the lipases have better access so that they can break down those and extract some of the energy from them. Here you see just some images of what the gallbladder looks like, storing and sending the bile. And throughout the small intestine, that's where you're going to have all this absorption. If someone has a health problem, maybe something growing, a tumor or something on their small intestine, part of it has to be cut out. By reducing the length, you reduce the absorption of nutrients, and that can lead to various types of nutrient deficiencies. Finally then, after these 20 plus feet of the small intestine, we get to the large intestine, and this is where the first part of elimination is going to occur. You push the contents of the small intestine, the stuff that hasn't been absorbed, into the large intestine, which is also called the colon. At this point, there aren't many nutrients left. There are a lot of inorganic ions, things that don't have carbon in them. There's a lot of water that's in your food or in fluids that you've consumed. In your colon, you have a huge amount of bacteria that live there in a symbiotic relationship with you. As the material is moving through, I should say this, that the more fiber you have in your diet, fiber is non-digestible carbohydrates. Because they're not digestible, they stimulate the smooth muscle to just keep pushing it. So the more fiber you have, the faster it moves through. The faster it moves through, the less time your body has for absorbing the water from it, recovering the water, or if there's not enough fiber, it moves more slowly. And if it's moving too slowly, there's more time for all the water to be reabsorbed and recovered by the body. Lots of these bacteria, as I said, and they are consuming material that hasn't been absorbed so far. In many cases, stuff that humans aren't able to. So in exchange for a place to live, we're giving them this energy, but then they produce some substances that are useful. They produce some vitamins and other materials that can aid in a variety of metabolic processes. You could summarize by saying, well, most of the nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. Most of the water is recovered and reabsorbed in the large intestine. And then what is finally eliminated typically does not have value to humans, in either as a source of energy or as a source of nutrients. There you have it.